we had today. So we had, in addition to the plenary speeches, so we have 4 sessions. One is about establishing a knowledge exchange space with 4 invited talks. The second session in the morning was user experience on ontology engineering tools with 3 invited speakers. The afternoon, so after the keynote speech, we had a session about ontology-based digital marketplaces for industry commons, in which we had 4 invited speakers. And the last session was on ontology adoption with 3 invited speakers. And as you know, all sessions are followed by discussion panel. And the objective of this session is to summarize those discussions, the presentations, in order, to allow people who didn't could attend the sessions to have an overview on what is happening in the session, what are the main outcomes. So I will invite Ebrahim Norouzi from Fraunhofer in order to provide a summary and major outcomes of the session of this morning about establishing a knowledge exchange space. Ebrahim. Is Ebrahim there? That's great. I stop sharing to allow you sharing.
Yeah, thank you, Hedi. So now I share my presentation. Do you have my slides?
Yes.
Okay, now I want to summarize the session that we had in the morning for establishing a knowledge exchange space for data management and documentation on behalf of Jan and also Florina. So I hope I can present it fully. So the objective of the session is to cooperate and engage with relevant stakeholders. So our session started with presentation of KEX. KEX workshop is a knowledge exchange space workshop. We had 2 of these closed workshops previously, and the objective is to connect and synergy of Ontology Commons with EOSC, European Open Science Cloud, and RDA, Research Data Alliance, and FAIR. So there are lots of projects that present their project and fund a collaboration with Ontology Commons. And the discussion points are for discussion of FAIR principles and semantic interoperability of data and services and infrastructure. And then the next step is to have more focused regular meeting and to establish communication channels like Slack and other Mattermost to have more communication between these projects and Ontology Commons. And then Barbara presents going fair, and Carol presented overview of EOSC, and then Hillary for RDA. And then for discussion, there are some points that Jan want to know during this session, like how do you manage multi-stakeholder collaborations? And the answer is to define the objective more clearly, and then delegate the legacy as clear as possible. And then what can be achieved during a 3-year project like Ontology Commons, and with only 2 years to go, and get key stakeholders on board and align objectives and activities, and establishing guiding principles. So these are the most discussion and summary points during this session.
Thank you, Ebrahim, for this insights, and hope that we are going more and more for fair ontologies and more collaboration. Thank you very much. So for the next session, I will invite Marìa to provide some feedback about the session. Marìa Poveda.
Hello.
Hi, Marìa.
Hi. So thank you. I'm going to present my slides. I will go briefly through them.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, now you see them. So yes. I'm going to summarize our session that was related to the industrial domain ontologies focus area, which aim is to improve the intra and cross-domain interoperability. I will go directly to the session we had. So we had first a talk from Enrico Motta, focusing on how the human-computer interaction has evolved or not evolved that much in the last decade, about the interface and needs for the interfaces and the visualization features. Then we have Felix Engel from TID, explaining or showing the main functionalities and needs for their terminology service for community-driven ontology development. All these repository or services that they are attaching to the technological framework. Sorry, I lost the slides. And finally, we had Ariel Waller presenting the asset information modeling framework, or how to adapt the practices to the heavy industry needs. And I lost my pointer, and I don't know if I will be able to go ahead. Okay, and then just to go quickly to the main points. So Enrico started very nicely his presentation talking about a not so recent a paper about what a visualization information tool should have, which requirements they should have, and also see that when it comes to ontologies, the landscape hasn't progressed much regarding these needs that we should consider when visualizing information. Actually, he showed some issues that Protege has, and also how to solve that with the summarization and the KBIS plugin that they develop. And one of the outcomes from the discussion was that there is a bigger market for developers than for ontology users side. So maybe that's why we still have some painful tools that are not so easy when you are not such an expert in the language or in the technology. The next points are related to Felix's talk. And the ones that I found more interesting is that the terminology shall be designed, maintained, and by a designated community, so that they can curate and keep the quality of the terminology. And it is a very important point here, the promotion of these terminologies and alignment with the standards. So they provide a service to facilitate these points. And the service is the next point. It's a community hub that also provides trust measures, technological features, and some of the features that we were also commenting in Enrico's talk. Finally, in Ariel's talk, we observe the need to structure the information in a precise way for some industries, but also in a simple way. And that sometimes is not so clear for some use cases, whether there is the A box and the T box, and how to define the hierarchies and the main entities, let's say. And also in this particular case, the relations for there are first-class citizens in the modeling framework presented. And also it is key the documentation of processes and decisions to keep track during the history why they come to the model they have. And finally, that it is very important for them in the industry to switch between perspective. So making views of what each user is looking for. And that is all from our session.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this interesting outcomes and discussions. So I would invite Gerhard Goldbeck to make a summary about the first session in the afternoon.
Oh, hello again. I'll share the screen with the presentation. Yeah. So this is a summary about the session on the ontology-based digital marketplaces, which was chaired by Ebrahim Norouzi, and we had a number of speakers here that started with the European Commission Project Officer Laszlo Hedi, and then 3 speakers from different marketplace projects that have already been taking place and give us some experiences, and then also another marketplace project, but one that started only recently, which is Stone 4.0, to see what their requirements are, and then a brief insight into one of the demonstrators from Ontology Commons, which is the marketplace interoperability demonstrator. Yeah, just a few points from the presentation by the European Commission Project Officer, pointing out some of the traits of successful marketplaces, from his perspective, the usability, functionality, the larger market, and being, competitive, which are of course very important, and sometimes, challenging if you, go into areas such as ours where you maybe not have, millions of customers, and hence not the same resources. It was also interesting. I just noted down, and obviously that will be distributed, the acronyms, that there is actually quite a number of other projects that we didn't have. We had here some of the projects, but not this list of IBUS, Phoenix, etc. Other current projects that also kind of marketplace or marketplace related projects that use conceptualizations, etc. So will be really interesting for us also then to look into these in the future. Then I tried to organize a little bit according to some of the questions that we had put, when we organized the session. So obviously first that we had the presentations from the longer running marketplaces. What are their experiences? 2 of the marketplaces make extensive use of ontologies. Other marketplaces less so, but they will require that for their future business, the shared conceptualization and so on. So we're interested in that. This is also a little bit my interpretation on things, that the application of ontologies is, one is kind of to support the marketplace operations, and the other is, of course, to connect more or less seamlessly with the external sources. So if all of the external information is based on shared conceptualization, that makes the life a lot easier, and so there's also interest of marketplaces to sort of organize information, external information like that, and do that in a way that is shared between marketplaces. But also then there are some advanced functionalities within marketplaces, or marketplaces could offer. One is like workflows of modeling, that are based on ontologies themselves. So taking it even to the next step of how ontologies could be used within marketplaces. There's actually one thing I will also add that maybe didn't come up so much is the sort of use of ontologies for mining usage data of customers using the marketplaces, but that's for our other discussion. And then the marketplaces in Market 4.0 that don't use it have sort of similar, very similar requirements really to in future make that data request and receive across marketplaces information to share and make that based on ontologies. And so the lessons learned are then balance between new ontology developments and using existing resources. So also timescale constraints when you want to develop something. In interoperability, that we talk a lot about the semantics, but again we are actually developing a specific application, so data models, constraints, syntactics do play a role and have to not be overlooked in terms of the challenges, and also annotation mapping challenges that still exists, and tools are needed to basically overcome issues such as timescale, errors, and so on, and the human factor needs to be taken into account. And challenges are kind of related, alignment with existing top-level ontologies, consensus development, balance between expressivity and usability, reuse, and then also kind of database and implementation challenges like triple store implementations, and then this sort of constantly developing technology, and then a number of specific application challenges as well. And then we heard also from the DOME 4.0 project, what are their expectations, what are the needs and requirements. It is using all of these resources that are out there in different marketplaces. So DOME is almost like a marketplace of marketplaces, and turning all of these assets, resources into knowledge assets, making semantic data exchange a reality into this sort of ecosystem information model. And so we come up with similar challenges in terms of data structures capable of ontological mapping and interoperability, enabling a range of functionalities on the marketplace, so that the marketplace really does not need to harvest data or search for specific records, but works at the meta level basically. Then how do you provide links, and what is the global framework? So this was already discussed in the previous points, and there's also a specific kind of solution at the moment between the marketplace and WIMP in materials modeling, which is this virtual marketplace framework. It's kind of like a small kind of mid-level type ontology that brings all the key concepts and categories together and ensures there's alignment at least at that level, and then maybe different specific versions then exist in the marketplaces, but they can kind of talk to each other, and that will be tested and also further developed in the Ontology Commons demonstrator that will work on the convergence of the underlying ontologies and taxonomies to enable supporting federated queries and also federated ingest of data. And I think that was all for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this great summary. And we'll finish the sessions with John Breslin for the last session.
Okay, hi everyone. Sorry, I just wasn't in speaker mode there, so
no problem.
Let me share my slides with you. So we had a good session today on ontology adoption, and we had 3 speakers who gave, I think, good insight into the adoption of certain ontologies in specific domains. We started with Marìa, who is CEO of and co-founder of Perpetual Labs, who talked about some of their work in systems engineering for space, and ended up with a nice overview of a platform they're developing called Graph SF, which is a knowledge graph tool for systems engineering. We had Martin Hepp, who you may know from the Good Relations ontology, which is one of the most widely used in the e-commerce domain, becoming a core part of schema.org, talking about web ontologies in practice. And we finished up with Clement Jonke from LIRMM, who was talking about OntoPortal. So let me just give you an overview of some of the content of those talks, and then a little bit about our discussion. Jean-Marie, again, it was a very interesting talk for me because he was giving very practical advice on adopting or deploying an ontology in a particular domain, and they're developing a nice framework for doing this. And one of the things he told me before we started the session was, he was tasked with developing an ontology for the space domain, but he found that the methodology for doing so wasn't really what he needed. And in fact, the methodology became kind of the key thing to do first to help build the ontology. And that's actually very aligned to what we're doing in Ontology Commons in terms of providing the methodological frameworks and the ecosystem toolkit to help people with use cases, showing how they work with ontologies. So he spoke, first of all, about the systems engineering approach for space, or semantic systems engineering, I should say, but also with applications across other disciplines. Particularly in the space application, they were looking at a mission called LAST and working on the design of the ontology for that particular mission. And one of the key focuses was traceability, and be able to trace different elements across the supply chain and through the system lifecycle, from initial components to finished product that goes up into space. And he talked about how they aligned to various larger ontologies, and then how they actually developed an ontological framework for describing how the architecture of the whole system was actually put together, and they had an ontology around that as well. He showed us a little bit about kind of patterns and modeling paradigms, which was interesting. And finally, as I mentioned, Graph SF, which is basically their platform to model knowledge and to connect different artifacts created in the knowledge graph to other elements related to the manufacturing, or I suppose the space application domain. For example, CAD drawings of the various components, simulations of the different components maybe coming from MATLAB, and all, as I said, from this kind of systems engineering background. So very interesting talk, and we had some good questions afterwards as well, including, would this be made available? Is there any publications about the ontology? How he aligns to BFO? And Jean-Marie works for a startup, so at the moment the system is in private beta, but they're looking at maybe releasing some of the developed outputs in Git at some stage. So second talk was from Martin Hepp, and I've got the slides in the wrong order there, but Martin talked about very broad scope in terms of what was covered. An excellent presentation on web ontologies in practice. And for me, even just kind of being able to explain to somebody what an ontology is and what's actually needed in terms of an ontology was something that we actually came towards in our discussion. The discussion of what a schema is was one part. Obviously there's some interoperability involved, but there's a gap between web ontologies, which is what the humans need or conceptualize in terms of producing and consuming data, and then some kind of database schemas which are related to the process, which is usually being modeled. And there can be several degrees of freedom between the web ontology what people make and the database that's very connected to the process. So that was an interesting observation. talked for a while about conceptual distinctions, and again, that idea that people have to be able to understand what this, when the same term has multiple meanings, and he referenced a paper on that. And there's a related question there in terms of how we shape classes and types and properties, and how important this is in terms of understanding. Also went through a couple of challenges. I won't go through them all there, but you can see them there on the screen. And I thought just this idea of what was called perspicuity was interesting in terms of it's essentially a bit like the understanding or not, or the transparency of ontology terms. Also ontology economics, that sometimes you have very small ontologies that just get broad use, and very large ontologies that get a small amount of use. And this is sometimes, again, around having a more focused set of terms that are just instantly reusable. And we had a discussion actually in our discussion session about, is there an intuition there in terms of developing that? And then maintenance and dynamics of an ontology is also another important aspect. So again, just it was interesting to hear just about the story of good relations in particular, and we talked about that in our discussion panel later on. Let me just go back to the questions there and see if there anything that I wanted to mention. Yeah, we had a discussion about heterogeneous, noisy data, and if you've large-scale data, it may be a little bit harder to do things, but you can still do stuff. And we talked about entropy in terms of the shape of the data, and then how that can help with actually working with it. Our third talk was from Clement Yonke, which was building on a previous presentation he gave at the March Ontology Commons workshop, and it was around the Ontoportal project. And he started off by describing the bioportal, which was something he worked on when he was in Stanford, and then seeing how that could be opened up to a broader range of people, but also a broader range of application areas and locations as well. So he gave some context in terms of the connection to the linked open data cloud, and how the bioportal formed a significant part of that. But then also in terms of how the bioportal was brought to France to incorporate terms that were specific to France, but also related to the general bio domain. And then also how that was applied to other application areas. For one of the big ones he's working on at the moment is the agro, or the agronomy area. And he talked about the agro portal, the eco environmental portal, and then related to Ontology Commons is the materials portal that's being developed at the moment, and subject to further work with Ontology Commons as well. So again, it was just interesting to hear about, again, how this was being used to create a broader access. He talked also about the FAIR principles, the findable, accessible, and so on, and how Ontoportal was a key enabler of FAIR principles for ontologies, and gave various screenshots of that as well. And there's an assessment to be released in paper form soon as well, so that's something to look out for. So then we moved into the discussion session, and I asked Clement about some success stories, and we talked for a while about the different Ontoportal type sites, the FAIR access that's enabled by them, and then also future work in terms of the materials portal and so on. We talked a little bit about how do we form coalitions or consensus around an ontology, and what was people's experiences of that. Martin answered this one, and had some views on, I suppose it depends on the level of the ontology. Is it kind of a top level overarching one? Is it a more specific domain one? Because bringing domain experts into the broader ontology sometimes may not work, because you have to have a different kind of view of what's going on. But in general, getting consensus, having big names associated with the outputs can obviously help with adoption, and I've seen that myself in various ontology efforts. Barriers to ontology adoption, I think even just the word ontology, we had a discussion about this, and Marìa also talked about this, is that for something that is ontologies being a definition of terms, the word ontology in itself could do with some good explanation to people who don't fully, or have different interpretations of what it means, because it ranges from knowledge organization systems to just terms to schemas to all different examples given there. But one of the key things was really understanding what it's going to be used for and what's the purpose. So what is the purpose of the ontology also dictates what's the platform that will be required to make it happen. And the example Martin gave was in terms of schema.org, because it's very clear what the purpose of it is being used in terms of more structured metadata for the web. you understand what are the requirements in terms of how it will be processed and how it will be used. So same for any ontology you're developing, you just want to understand what is the need, what is the need, what are the requirements, and therefore that will dictate how usable it is, what technology platform you use, how many resources you need, and so on. The last part then was about industry willingness to adopt ontologies. Again, this tied into the fact that if industry knows what they want to do with the data, the more it will be able to build the useful ontology. Defining a clear purpose for the ontology, what you need it for, is key to any kind of ontology adoption strategy. So that's it.
Thank you, John. I mean, I think the last point is related to our first keynote this morning. I mean, the question is usually to clearly define the purpose of the ontology and who will use the ontology on and for which purpose. Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you. So it was a long day, but a great day with great discussions. Tomorrow also we'll have great sessions. So keynote speech in the morning, keynote speech in the afternoon, two parallel sessions in the morning, two parallel sessions in the afternoon. So tomorrow the day we start at 10:30 CET time. So thank you very much, and see you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.